Now, Michelangelo's late work fit very well into the Mannerist tradition, but there are also a couple of artists that I would like to look at as well who spent their entire careers as Mannerists. And the first one of those is Parmigianino. Now, it's a tough one. You know, Italian can be, it's not French, but it can be a little tough sometimes. And this means in English, the little one from Parma. And, this guy, super talented. They said he was celebrated as a Raphael reborn, and he's producing some iconic works, and he died at 37. Now, for a frame of reference, I'm 38, so, he was younger than me, and this guy had produced something amazing. We can see here in this self-portrait in a convex mirror, this willingness to augment and manipulate reality. He wanted to portray himself as he looks in this mirror, and it's really something of a challenge because if you think about what Raphael is doing is really awesome, but he's idealizing, he's not augmenting. And so when you see here, like, look at that big hand and look at this, and really having to challenge the mind to, adjust to these proportions. I wouldn't think this comes naturally. Now, I can't paint my way out of a bag, but this looks talented right here. So he's not just emulating the people who came before him, he's doing something brand new. Well, kind of new. Still Renaissance, remember. Mannerism is still Renaissance art. Now, we can see here the conversion of St. Paul, which is over a decade before Michelangelo's conversion of Saul. Now, you can see here, this is, it was painted really at the end of the High Renaissance, and so it's not like anti-Renaissance or anything like that, but certainly there is some tension here, okay? Now, I still see bright colors and stuff like that, but there's some tension. And you can see here that St. Paul has these long bending fingers, okay? So we'll look at the fingers in the next one as well, but pay attention to the fingers and also this sense of fear. Like, he's scared. Now, of course, there's Jesus up in the sky. It looks like he's scared of the horse, but in general, you can see this fear on his face, which is not something that Renaissance art sought to portray because there's really nothing ideal about fear. So we see here this emotion. Now you can see this finger again. We see the vision of Saint Jerome. Now there's Saint Jerome in the corner, but really the central figure of this painting is Saint John the Baptist. And you look at this crooked finger. I have to I can hold my finger straight, I think. So it's like, but he's like, oh, I want to make this really crooked. Imagine having to pose for that, that would be kind of tough. But look at that finger. Now compare this to Leonardo da Vinci's St. John the Baptist, okay? So you can see here, completed during the High Renaissance, that this finger is perfectly straight. All of the face and everything's proportional and everything looks ideal. The skin looks healthy. And so you see the symmetry, the ideal proportion, the finger kind of offsets the face and everything, and the straightness of this index finger. And you compare it to this finger and it's like, whoa. And it's not like one's more realistic than the other, but they're kind of bending reality in their own various ways. And then when you look at St. John the Baptist's face, you see that his face is kind of got a reddish, kind of ruddy complexion. When you look at the shadows or even on, his arm there, you can see some blemishes, okay? So it's okay in Mannerist art for somebody to have some blemishes. The Madonna with the long neck is really the most iconic painting by Parmigianino. You look at this and this really typifies Mannerist art because it's challenging several Renaissance conventions, but at the same time, it still looks like something of a Renaissance painting. But when we look at this painting closely, we see first of all that the Virgin's neck is elongated for swan-like elegance. Stop looking at me, swan! So in order to make her appear more elegant, he is making her neck disproportional, augmenting this reality. We see here that all of the adoring angels are on the same side, so he's rejecting the strict conventions of Renaissance symmetry. Now, when we look at baby Jesus, we see here, whoa, don't fall, baby Jesus, okay, because he's not stable. It's like, Woman, hold your child. Now, I'm talking to the mother of God here. I should be a little bit respectful, but really, like, come on. Like, your child's about to whoosh. And, so, I mean, this looks like, you look at this painting and you're scared for the baby. It's like, somebody help hold him up. Maybe one of the angels can help or something like that. I'm concerned. And then when we see here that her right foot is perched awkwardly, kind of jutting into what they call our side of the canvas. Now, a Renaissance painting is supposed to have a 3D look to it, but something's not supposed to be poking out at you. And you almost feel like that foot is coming out of the painting. And even when we look at the toes, they're not like ideal looking toes. E.H. Gombrich in The Story of Art writes about this painting and Parmigianino's approach. The painter wanted to be unorthodox. He wanted to show the classical solution of perfect harmony is not the only solution conceivable. Parmigianino and all the artists of his time who deliberately sought to create something new and unexpected, even at the expense of the natural beauty established by the great masters, were perhaps the first modern artist. Now, remember, we talk about the Renaissance, natural in quotes, because it's not really natural, it is idealized natural. And so we move here into the augmented natural. Whoa, what's that? Like, whoa, like, buddy, like, this thing is just like, I mean, that disturbs me to look at. No wonder, maybe that's the painting that killed him. But my goodness, like, that one is, I don't even know what to say about it, so let's move on. El Greco is the other iconic artist of the Mannerist tradition, and when we look at El Greco's work, we're looking at late Mannerism. So he was a Greek-born Spanish Mannerist painter. His name here, it looks like Dominikos Theotokopoulos, something like that, okay, but you can call him the Greek. All right, Kat, that's for you. Okay, so, sorry, my Greek is not as good as yours. So, a Greek-born Spanish Mannerist painter. He went from Crete to Rome and then finally to Spain, where he produced his greatest work. This is believed to be a self-portrait. Now, you'll see the late Mannerism. This really doesn't look like Renaissance art. It looks like either, some of it looks more Baroque, or is that a word, Baroque? Is that a word? I don't know. But, some of it looks 20th century. Let's look at it. Now, we see St. Andrew and St. Francis. Now, note 1595 as the Mannerist tradition is starting to move into the Baroque. And so you notice that St. Andrew and St. Francis, they're portrayed as very elongated. This does not look natural. Look at those long fingers and everything. Then you look at the signature. He was signing with his Greek name, but of course everybody else called him the Greek. It's much easier to say. And so when we look at this, also remember that the Renaissance, as we see in the late Renaissance, this tendency of artists to sign their work and claim their work. And here is El Greco's painting of Laocoon. I think I said that right. Again, Greek is hard to say. Kat, I don't know how you do it. This painting depicts this Trojan priest who was killed along with his sons by snakes sent by the gods. This is the guy that said, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. And so he stuck a spear in the Trojan horse or something. The gods weren't happy. And he and his sons were devoured by snakes. Now, when you look at this, you're like, wow, I mean, this is very, very modern looking. And he looks very vulnerable, even though they're kind of muscular. It's like weird muscular. Now, we compare this to a classical sculpture of Laocoon. And this was, this is an actual like Greco-Roman sculpture that they excavated in Rome during the High Renaissance. And so look at the muscles here. Look how powerful he is. And when you look at El Greco's work, you see how powerless and fearful he is. Whereas, in this classical sculpture, it's like, oh, this snake's going to bite me, but I sure am strong and muscular. Look at me. So when you make that comparison, it's kind of interesting there, and you can see where Mannerism has drifted away from this, idealized body of the Renaissance. This is the burial of the Count of Orgaz, which is his most famous work, and this was influenced by both Byzantine art and the Counter-Reformation. Now remember, as we're transitioning to the Baroque, we see that the Counter-Reformation is something that is increasingly influencing art. And so we see here the heavenly plane, where there's Jesus and the Virgin Mary. You see the keys to the kingdom, and you see all of the saints gathered gathered there. And then we go down onto the earthly plane. And the story of the Count of Orgaz, he was actually someone who had Greek lineage. So it's interesting that El Greco painted him a member of the family of the last Byzantine emperors. And he was somebody who was a very pious man, and so pious, in fact, that St. Stephen and St. Augustine came down and buried him personally. So we see this story from the Catholic tradition. And so very much an Orthodox Catholic sort of treatment here, and not something that's got a bunch of, pagan symbolism like Michelangelo's Last Judgment. Now, speaking of Orthodox, this is compared often to a Byzantine icon depicting the Dormition of the Mother of God. And when you look at this, just like in El Greco's work, you see the heavenly and the earthly plane together. So, he's really being, he's amalgamating a lot of different styles and bringing this Eastern European, Byzantine, Greek form of art into it. Now, El Greco was way ahead of his time. When we look at this, again, I would think that this is 20th century. This is the view of Toledo in Spain. This was painted in 1600. And wow, when you look at the colors there. Now, also note in El Greco's work and in late Michelangelo, you see a lot of blues. That's a very common color that we're seeing here in a lot of this Mannerist art. And then here we see the opening of the fifth seal, a scene from the book of Revelation. And his art influenced several 20th century artists. There was a pretty cool article I read about it. If you just Google El Greco ahead of his time, I'm sure it'll come up. It was on BBC, and it was a good read. But this is really, when you look at Mannerism, the willingness to challenge convention. And remember, the lesson from this, okay, is that if somebody else has already done something perfect and they're already doing something great, be original. Do something else. Because these artists were known because they went their own way and they did something original. And be sure to take a look at my videos on Renaissance art and the Baroque. I've got a website, and subscribe to my channel, @Tom Richey on social media. It's always a pleasure.